Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I start my presentation, I would like to make one comment on the speech that was just made by the Honorable Dr. Karen Cummings. Mr. Speaker, towards the end of her speech, I sat here with a bated breath, awaiting to see that motion she was speaking about. But, Mr. Speaker, none was forthcoming. I hope that all of the other activities she mentioned to us in the plans for the 2016 health budget, that we will not also have to sit with a bated breath, because I will be expecting to see a lot more activities, and I will still await that motion. Colleague. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my presentation to the 2016 budget debate. Let me, sir, congratulate the Honorable Minister of Finance for an early budget presentation. But most importantly, I would like to congratulate the hard-working public servants whom I knew worked tirelessly to make possible this early budget. Mr. Speaker, the public servants of this country are hard-working and have demonstrated over the years their dedication to the growth and development of this country. There is no denying that over the last 10 years, there was renewed hope among our public servants as a result of the progressive social policies of the PPP administration. Mr. Speaker, today our public servants are suffering from anxiety syndrome. They are anxious, Mr. Speaker, because they are unsure whether they will join the scores of their colleagues who were unceremoniously dismissed from their jobs. This fear is justified, Mr. Speaker, because it is common knowledge that public officers at all levels were sent packing simply because of their known or perceived association with the PPP Civic. This practice is having adverse effects on our public institutions' performances because most of the replacement employees are either unqualified for the specific jobs or inexperienced. Mr. Speaker, it would be commendable if the Honorable Minister with responsibility for the public service could pay some urgent attention to this ill that is plaguing the public sector. Mr. Speaker, the public servants who are contracted workers are anxious. They are unsure about their fate. Currently, sir, all contracted workers in the government agencies who are employed under the PPPC regime are being issued with application forms to enter the pensionable establishment. Apart from being told that their contracts will not be renewed and that they will be placed on the pensionable establishment, no other vital information is being divulged to them. Mr. Speaker, this unilateral decision by the government to discontinue contract employment is undemocratic and takes away the fundamental rights of the workers to choose. Mr. Speaker, there is something called the Public Service Rules, which we inherited from our colonial era and still forms part of our jurisprudence. Replicas of these rules are still operational in the United Kingdom and other former colonized countries today. The public service rules can be deemed the standard operational procedure manual of the public service. These rules dictate how employment issues such as recruitment, appointments, promotions, transfers, training, discipline, retirement, and severance should be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned these rules in an attempt to enlighten this House on their existence. And in particular, I would like to draw members' attention to Section A, which deals with the issues of recruitment. Mr. Speaker, Section A, paragraph A08 states, captioned on the employment and contract, states as follows: public servants in professional and certain other categories may opt for contract employment. And I repeat, sir, public servants in professional and certain other categories may opt for contract employment. So you see, sir, the employment of contracted workers by the PPPC administration was not a plan concocted with sinister motives, as it was peddled by some of my honorable colleagues on the other side of this House. It was, sir, a long-established policy which ensured that the workers' democratic right of choice was not denied. Mr. Speaker, for years, this category of workers has been derogatorily called PPP hacks by members of the current administration. I wonder, sir, what the new cadre of contracted workers employed by this government should be called. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would like to urge the minister responsible to review this undemocratic practice with the intent of ensuring that Section A, paragraph 08 is properly enforced. It will indeed create hardship on the affected workers if this is not done. Mr. Speaker, another factor which causes great anxiety among workers, especially, again, the contracted workers, is the fact that a large percentage of them are over the age of 45. Mr. Speaker, according to the Pensions Act of Guyana, the age of retirement is 55, and to be eligible for a pension, a person must have completed 10 years of unbroken pensionable service. So you see, sir, these persons will not be eligible for a pension when they attain the age of retirement under the current labor law, should they be placed on the pensionable establishment. This could not be in keeping with the good life to which the Honorable of Finance referred. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labor omitted to mention any measure or measures to amend the age of retirement, as he outlined his list of measures to be undertaken by the ministry for which he holds responsibility. I would like to recommend that the Pensions Act be considered for revision, in particular the section which prescribes the age of retirement and associated benefits. I hope that the minister with responsibility for the public service will treat this matter with some alacrity. Mr. Speaker, in any country, citizens pay keen attention to the budget on the aspects of salary increases and taxation. It was therefore shocking to the workers when the Honorable Minister of Finance announced that public servants will have to wait the conclusion of discussions with the relevant unions before salary increases can be decided. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister said he understood their disappointment at hearing this announcement, but I dare say that this announcement surpassed disappointment. It amounted to a state of profound shock and disbelief, since it was in breach of the 20% across the board salary increase for public servants, which was muttered and used as a mantra during the Alliance campaign. Mr. Speaker, I am overly joyful that the collective bargaining process is being given an opportunity to work, as was mentioned by the Honorable Minister of Finance. But I want to echo the sentiments expressed by the Honorable Gillian Burton and ask, why couldn't these collective bargaining discussions be completed before the budget presentation, especially since the Honorable Minister of Labor announced during his speech that the relationship between the government and the unions are amicable. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see the issue of a dangling good life carrot being removed. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we have heard a lot of comments from both sides of this House since this debate commenced in relation to the importation of cars above 8 years old. And I know that many more comments will be forthcoming. The reality of this policy decision is that it will create another layer of hardship for the working class, since cars 8 years and below will obviously be more costly than cars above 8 years. Mr. Speaker, this measure was announced under the budget heading, Measures in Support of Our Program of Greening the Economy and Protecting the Environment. Is the Honorable Minister of Finance contending that cars 8 years old are detrimental to our environment? As far as I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, Guyana is still a net zero emitter of carbon into the environment. Maybe, sir, the Honorable Minister of Finance is thinking of our future protection. If that was the thinking...
Honourable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, can I seek your permission for an extension from the 2 minutes plus 5 minutes she is entitled to? Thank you.
Honourable Member, you will be permitted to speak for 20 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Please go ahead.
If that was the thinking behind this measure, we may soon see regulations banning citizens from driving vehicles over a certain age. This, Mr. Speaker, is a frightening thought. Also, Mr. Speaker, the ban on the importation of used tires had several comments during this debate. Again, it is our working class who will be adversely affected. I am aware that improper tires on a vehicle can create accidents, which could cause victims to suffer disability or even loss of life. Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that there wasn't any holistic vision when this policy was being formulated. It is a fact, sir, that the banning of used tires will not stop accidents or pollution of our environment. Mr. Speaker, even the new tires that are being imported today will one day become old or used and will pose the same safety and environmental problems being envisioned by the Honorable Minister. What is urgently needed is the enforcement of standards governing the importation of used tires, and I dare say, tires in general, because even persons who purchase new tires can attest to some being sold on the market which are of inferior quality. Mr. Speaker, I wish to urge the government to design adequate mechanisms for the disposal of old tires. This is the type of progressive thinking that is needed, not banning. We have to be cautious, lest we return to the past when banning was in vogue. Mr. Speaker, permit me to say a few words on the increased licensing fees for shotguns. Shotguns are used not as recreational tools, but as a tool of livelihood in specifically Region 7 and to a larger extent other hinterland communities in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, without a shotgun residents whose existence depends on farming would lose everything to wild animals. These residents to whom I refer, sir, mostly engage in farming to provide food for their families. They don't sell their produce, which means they cannot pass on the increased license fees to any customer. Mr. Speaker, to protect the livelihood of these vulnerable citizens of our country, the Minister of Finance must exempt them from paying these exorbitant prices. The Honorable Minister, sir, has the discretionary power to grant such exemptions. Mr. Speaker, all of the safety net provisions to protect vulnerable groups that were implemented by the PPPC administration were deemed discriminatory by the current administration. But, sir, even in the much admired United States of America, there are discriminatory policies in favor of disadvantaged groups. They call it by a nice name, sir. They call it affirmative action. For whatever it's worth, the safety nets that were implemented by the PPPC administration benefited the vulnerable groups and should not be removed. Please don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Our
Remember,
people
you have 3 minutes more.
need to be given more, not have the little they have. They were given, taken away from them. Mr. Speaker, in the penultimate paragraph of his budget, the Honorable Minister of Finance spoke about leaving behind acrimony, partisanship, and division. These are indeed comforting words, but how can they be taken seriously when simultaneously we hear phrases such as payback time, knock back, and the shoe is on the other foot? Mr. Speaker, you have to listen carefully, sir. I didn't say it was in the budget. You have to listen carefully. I never said that was in the budget. Mr. Speaker, already we have a number of short-sighted politicians in our political landscape. If we don't get rid of our eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth mentality, definitely, sir, in the very near future, Guyana will be replete with a slew of blind, toothless politicians as a result of us digging each other's eyes out and pulling out each other's teeth. It is time, Mr. Speaker, for us to match our unifying words with actions. I thank you.